Good evening and a very warm welcome to Sleep Tales. Thank you for joining me here in this quiet space. I am so glad you have chosen this story to help you unwind and drift away tonight. Before we begin our journey, if you find comfort here and wish to support this channel, a simple subscription or a like on this video would mean the world to me. It helps our small community grow. I also always love to see where these stories travel, so please feel free to leave a comment telling me where you are listening from tonight. Now find a comfortable position. Close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it go. Let the sounds of your day fade away and allow my voice to be your guide. We are about to travel to a quiet valley, to a world of water and whispers. Let the story begin. Introduction. Kaia lived in a green valley. This valley was a quiet place, tucked away from the rest of the world. It was called the Headwaters. The name was simple and true. It was the beginning of the great river, the place where clean water bubbled up from deep within the earth to start its long journey to the sea. The air in the headwaters was always clean and cool. It smelled of damp earth, wet stones, and the sweet scent of river flowers. The trees grew tall and strong, their leaves forming a thick green roof over the valley floor. Sunlight came through this roof in soft, shifting patches, making the moss on the rocks glow like tiny green lamps. The ground was soft, a thick carpet of fallen leaves and rich soil that made every footstep quiet. Kaia was a young woman of 23 years. Her hair was the color of dark, wet wood, and her eyes were the color of the deep, clear pools in the river. She was part of a people known as the Whisperers. Her people did not have loud voices. They did not build big towns or create loud machines. Their lives were woven into the life of the river. Their job, their purpose, was to listen to the water. They did not listen with their ears for the sound of splashing or gurgling. They listened with their hearts, with their entire being. They listened for the river's song. Every stream, every creek, and every river had its own song. It was a feeling, a deep hum of life that flowed with the current. A healthy stream sang a bright, happy song full of energy and light. The great river, in the heart of the valley, sang a song that was deep and slow and powerful. It was a song of ancient strength and endless patience. The Whisperers lived to protect these songs. They would clear fallen logs that blocked the water's flow, not just to help the water move, but to soothe a blockage in its song. They would guide young fish back to the main current, feeling the river's quiet thanks. Their lives were a gentle dance with the water. Kaia was very good at her job. She had a special gift for feeling the river's emotions. She could feel the joy of a stream as it tumbled over smooth rocks. She could feel the deep peace of a pool of water resting in the afternoon sun. She loved the water with all her heart. But Kaia was also impatient. She loved the big, strong feelings of the river. She loved the power of the spring melt when the water was high and its song was a mighty roar. She found it difficult to sit for hours, as her father did, just to listen to the tiny, quiet whispers of a single water plant. She felt the river's power, but she did not always have the patience for its secrets. Her father was named Leon. He was the master whisperer, the one who listened most deeply to the great river. He was a calm and quiet man. His face had gentle lines carved by years of smiling and years of listening. He moved slowly and with great care, as if he did not want to disturb the air around him. He had taught Kaia everything she knew. He had shown her how to place her hands in the cool water and feel its song travel up her arms and into her chest. He had taught her how to tell the difference between the song of a river that was happy and the song of a river that was tired. Their bond was as deep and as strong as the river itself. But he worried for her. He knew she loved the river, but he also knew that she did not yet understand what it meant to truly listen. He would tell her, "Feeling the river's shout is easy, Kaia. The true skill is in hearing its quietest breath." She did not always understand what he meant. She thought that love and power were all that mattered. She would soon learn how wrong she was. Her life, and the life of her entire valley, was about to change forever. The song she had known her whole life was about to face a terrible silence. Chapter 1. The Hush. The change began so quietly that at first no one was sure it was real. It was not a loud noise or a sudden event. It was the opposite. It was a lack of something. It started as a single wrong note in the great symphony of the water. Only the oldest and most skilled whisperers noticed it. They would be sitting by the banks of the great river, their eyes closed, their minds open to its song. They would feel the deep, steady hum of the current, the music they had known for all their lives. But then, for just a moment, a tiny thread of that music would seem to vanish. It was a feeling of emptiness, a small, cold spot in the warm flow of the river's song. It was faint, and it was far away, coming from somewhere downriver, beyond the borders of their quiet valley. Leon was the first to give it a name. He stood with the other elders on a flat, gray rock that overlooked the widest part of the river. The water flowed past them, clear and strong, its song filling the air with a feeling of peace. But Leon's face was not peaceful. His eyes were focused on the horizon, on the place where the river left their valley and traveled out into the world. "It is a silence," he said, his voice barely louder than the moving water. "A place where the song should be, but is not. It is a hush." The other elders nodded slowly. They had all felt it. It was a chilling feeling, like hearing a bird that always sang outside your window suddenly go quiet. It was a sign that something was wrong. In the days that followed, they gathered often to listen. They would sit for hours, from sunrise to sunset, their hands trailing in the cool water, their minds stretched out along the current, trying to understand this new, empty feeling. They learned that the hush was coming from a part of the river that flowed through the lands of men. In their language, they called this place the Grey Wash. It was a name they spoke with sadness. The whisperers knew of the human world. They knew it was a place of hard stone, loud noises, and hurried lives. They knew that the people there had forgotten how to listen to the world around them. The river flowed through their great cities, but they did not see it. They did not hear its song. Now it seemed their forgetting had become a sickness, a silence that was spreading back towards the river's source. The hush grew stronger with each passing week. What had started as a faint, cold spot was now a steady feeling of emptiness that pushed against the river's natural song. It felt like a slow, creeping sadness, a heavy weight that was making the river tired. The change began to affect the smaller streams inside their valley. Willow Creek was Kaia's favorite place. It was a small, happy stream that tumbled down a hillside covered in soft moss and white flowers. Its song had always been fast and bright, like a cheerful laugh. Kaia would go there when she felt restless, and its joyful music would always calm her mind. One day, she went to the creek and sat on her usual sun-warmed rock. She closed her eyes to listen, but the song was different. The cheerful laugh was gone. The song was still there, but it was weak and slow, like a tired whisper. The water itself looked the same, still clear and clean, but its life, its spirit, felt diminished. It felt sad. The hush was like a poison, and it was slowly draining the life from their home. The fear in the valley grew. The whisperers were a people of peace, but now their faces were tight with worry. The song of the river was the song of their own lives. If it faded, they did not know what would become of them. Leon knew that listening from afar was no longer enough. He called a meeting of the elders. They gathered in a circle in the evening light, their faces serious. "The hush is not retreating," Leon said, his voice calm but firm. "It is advancing. It is a hunger that is eating our river's song. If we do nothing, it will reach the headwaters. It will silence the heart of our world." He told them he had made a decision. He would go to the border of their lands, to the very edge of the valley, where the river water first began to show the strain of the world beyond. He would not just listen, he would act. The other elders were worried. Such an act was dangerous. To push one's own life song into the river was a great risk, especially against such a powerful silence. But they saw the determination in his eyes. They knew he was the only one strong enough to even try. He found Kaia by the riverbank that evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of orange and purple. He sat beside her on the cool stones. For a long time, they did not speak. They just listened together to the river's song, which was now tinged with a constant, low note of sorrow. "I am leaving in the morning," Leon said softly. Kaia's heart grew cold. She knew what he meant. "You are going to fight it," she said. It was not a question. "I am going to try to remind the river of its own strength," he corrected her gently. "The song is not dead. It is only trapped. I must try to free it." He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep love. "You must stay here, Kaia. You must guard the headwaters. Your strength will be needed to protect the source. Do not let the hush get past the old stone bridge. Promise me." Kaia wanted to argue. She wanted to go with him. She wanted to use her own power to help. But she saw the seriousness in his face. She knew this was a promise she had to keep. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He placed his hand on her head, a final, quiet blessing. The next morning, Leon left. He carried nothing with him but a small leather pouch of water from the very source of the river. Kaia watched him walk away, his tall, straight form slowly getting smaller until he disappeared into the morning mist that hung over the valley. She felt a terrible sense of dread settle over her. She spent the rest of the day by the river, trying to listen, trying to feel what her father was doing. Miles away, Leon stood at the edge of his world. Here, the trees were thinner. The air did not smell as sweet. The river flowed past him, and its song was weak and broken. The silence from the gray wash pushed against him, a cold and heavy presence. He waded into the water until it was up to his waist. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He opened the leather pouch and poured the pure water from the source into the tired river. Then he began his work. He was the master whisperer. His own life song was a thing of immense power, a deep and resonant harmony he had cultivated over a lifetime of listening. He did not shout or push. He began to sing his song into the water. It was not a song of words. It was a song of feeling, of pure spirit. He poured all his strength, all his memories, all his love for the river into the current. He sent a wave of pure life flowing downstream, a golden thread of music aimed at the heart of the hush. He was trying to remind the sick part of the river what it felt like to be whole, to be alive, to be joyful. Back in the heart of the valley, Kaia felt it. She was sitting on the bank of the great river, her eyes closed, when a sudden warmth flooded the water. It was her father's song, powerful and bright. It felt like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. The river around her seemed to rejoice. Its own song swelled, rising to meet her father's call. For a glorious moment, the heavy sadness that had plagued the water was pushed back. A wave of pure, clean music washed over everything. Kaia felt a surge of hope. He was doing it. He was winning. Then, just as quickly as it had come, it was gone. The warmth vanished. The powerful song was cut off, as if by a giant blade. A coldness rushed back up the river, 100 times more intense than before. It was not just an emptiness. It was a void, a deep, hungry, absolute silence. Kaia cried out, a sharp gasp of fear and pain. She felt it in her very soul. The river's song had been struck a terrible blow, and her father's song, his bright and beautiful life force, was simply gone. She scrambled to her feet and began to run. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to get closer. The elders had felt it too. They were already moving, their faces grim. They found Leon hours later. He was lying on the riverbank, right where their valley ended and the wider world began. His body was still warm, his chest was still rising and falling with slow, shallow breaths. But he was not there. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful, but empty. He was in a deep, unbreakable sleep. Kaia knelt beside him, placing her hand on his chest. She tried to feel his song, the familiar, comforting hum of his life that had been a constant presence her whole life. There was nothing. It was gone. The hush had not just defended itself. It had attacked. It had consumed him. It had taken her father and left only a silent, empty shell behind. The great silence had come to her home, and her world had fallen quiet. Chapter 2. A Desperate Choice. Kaia was filled with a grief so large it felt like a stone in her chest. The journey back to their village was a slow, heavy walk. The elders carried Leon's body on a stretcher made of woven branches. He was not heavy, but the silence he carried with him felt heavier than any mountain. Kaia walked beside him, her hand resting on his still arm. It was warm, but it felt empty. The life, the song that had always flowed through him, was gone. She could not feel it. She could only feel the terrible, cold quiet of the hush that now clung to him like a shroud. The other whisperers watched them return. They stood silently by the path, their faces pale and full of fear. No one spoke. There were no words for this. The master whisperer, their shield and their heart, had been silenced. The fear was a living thing now, a cold mist that settled over the entire valley. The bright green of the leaves seemed a little duller. The clear water of the river seemed a little darker. The world itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the silence to swallow it whole. They placed Leon in his room. It was a simple room, with walls made of smooth river stones and a window that looked out over the water. He had always loved to watch the river from that window. They laid him on his bed, and he looked as if he were only sleeping. But it was not sleep. Sleep was a place of rest, a quiet song of its own. This was an emptiness. Kaia sat on a small stool beside his bed. She did not leave. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She just watched him, hoping to see a flicker of his eyelids, hoping to feel the smallest echo of his song return. But there was nothing. Only the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest, a purely physical thing that held no spirit within it. Her grief began to change. Over the long hours of watching and waiting, the deep stone of sadness in her chest began to grow hot. It started to burn. The grief was still there, but now it was wrapped in a searing, blistering anger. She was angry at the silence. She was angry at the hush for being so hungry, so cruel. She was angry at the gray wash, the sick part of the river that had poisoned her father. She was angry at the faceless, nameless humans who had forgotten the river and allowed it to become so sick. They did not even know what they had done. They had broken the world with their carelessness, and her father had paid the price. She was angry at the elders, with their quiet warnings and their cautious ways. Why had they let him go alone? Why had they not all gone to fight? And deep down, in a place she did not want to look, she was angry at herself. She had stayed behind. She had guarded the headwaters as he had asked, but it felt like she had done nothing. She had promised to protect the source, but the silence had reached into their home and taken the most important thing of all. The anger was a fire in her veins. It made her restless. She could not sit still any longer. The quiet sadness of the valley felt suffocating. The worried faces of the elders felt like a judgment. They looked at her with pity. But she did not want their pity. She wanted action. She wanted to fight. She wanted to hurt the thing that had hurt her father. The feeling grew and grew until it was a wild storm inside her. She knew she could not stay here, watching the world fade. She had to do something. The promise she made to her father felt like a distant memory, a rule for a world that no longer existed. The new world, this silent world, demanded a different kind of promise. A promise of vengeance. One night, when the moon was a thin, sharp sliver in the dark sky, she left the village. She moved like a shadow, her bare feet making no sound on the soft earth. The fire of her anger was her only guide. She did not feel the cool night air. She did not see the beauty of the stars. She only saw the path that led away from her home, the path that followed the river downstream. She was going to the border. She was going to face the hush herself. She did not have her father's wisdom or his patience, But she had her own strength. She had her rage. She believed it was enough. She would pour all of her power, all of her anger, into the river. She would scream her song into the silence and force it to break. The journey to the edge of the valley was long. The path grew rougher. The sweet smell of the headwaters faded, replaced by a damp, stagnant scent. The song of the river grew weaker with every step she took. It was a pained, struggling sound, like the breathing of a wounded animal. When she finally reached the place where her father had fallen, the air itself felt heavy and dead. This was the front line of the war. On one side was the struggling song of her home. On the other was the vast, oppressive weight of the hush. It was not just a lack of sound. It was an active, crushing presence. It felt like a great, invisible wall that absorbed all life and all energy. Kaia did not hesitate. She walked into the cold, tired water. It swirled around her legs, sluggish and gray. She closed her eyes and gathered her strength. She remembered the power she felt during the spring floods, the raw energy of the wild water. She called on that power now. She called on her grief and her rage. She let the fire inside her build until she felt she would burst. Then she released it. She screamed her song into the river. It was not a song of harmony or of listening. It was a raw, jagged cry of defiance. It was a blade of pure power aimed at the heart of the silence. For a single, breathtaking moment, she felt it connect. Her power struck the wall of silence. She felt a tremor, a tiny crack in the great emptiness. A surge of triumph shot through her. She pushed harder, pouring more of her life force, more of her rage into the attack. She was going to win. She was going to tear it apart. And then the silence pushed back. It was not a wave of energy. It was not a counterattack. It was something far worse. The silence simply opened and swallowed her song whole. Her power, her rage, her grief, all of it vanished into the void as if it had never existed. The tiny crack she had made was gone. The wall was not a wall at all. It was an endless, hungry mouth. And now it turned its attention to her. A cold that had nothing to do with the water seeped into her bones. The silence flowed up the connection she had made, rushing towards her. It was a feeling of absolute nothingness. It drained the color from her vision. It stole the air from her lungs. It began to pull at her own song, her own life force, trying to unravel her, trying to drink her spirit just as it had her father's. Memories of sunlight, of laughter, of her father's smile, all began to fade, turning gray and distant. The fire of her anger was extinguished, leaving only a cold, black ash of terror. She was being erased. With the last ounce of her will, she broke the connection. She ripped her mind away from the river and stumbled backward, falling onto the muddy bank. She lay there, gasping, her body trembling violently. The world slowly came back into focus, but everything looked washed out and faded. The emptiness still clung to her, a deep internal chill that she knew would not go away. She had not hurt the hush. She had not even made a scratch. She had only offered herself to it, and it had almost consumed her. She had failed. Her power was not enough. Her rage was nothing. She was nothing against the great silence. She curled into a small ball on the cold ground, and for the first time since her father had fallen, she wept. Her tears were silent, lost in the greater silence that surrounded her. She did not know how long she lay there. It could have been hours. It could have been minutes. Eventually, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked up and saw the faces of two of the elders, Elara and Ren. Their faces were not angry. They were filled with a deep, weary sadness. They had known where she would go. They had followed her. They helped her to her feet. She was weak, her legs unsteady. She leaned on Ren as they began the slow walk back to the village. She did not speak. There was nothing to say. Her failure was a cold, heavy thing inside her. They did not take her to her home. They took her to the circle of stones, a ring of ancient, moss-covered monoliths at the very heart of the valley. It was a sacred place where the most important decisions were made. The other elders were already there, waiting. They sat in a silent circle. They made a place for her. The air in the circle felt different. It was still and quiet, but it was not the hungry quiet of the hush. It was a quiet of deep thought and immense age. Kaia sat, her head bowed in shame. Elara, the oldest of them, was the first to speak. Her voice was like the rustling of dry leaves, but it was steady. "You have felt its strength," she said. It was a statement, not a question. Kaia could only nod. "Your father felt it too. He was the strongest of us, and it took him. Your anger is strong, Kaia, but it is like a fire. It burns bright and hot, but the silence is like the deep ocean. It quenches all fire." Ren spoke next, his voice deeper, like the sound of stones shifting at the bottom of the river. "We cannot fight it. Not like that. We cannot go to the silence. We must protect the song." He explained their plan. They would all join their strength. They would not attack. They would defend. They would weave their life songs together into a great barrier, a dam made of sound and spirit. This barrier would be placed at the old stone bridge, the last major crossing before the valley truly began. It would hold the hush at bay. It would not heal the lower river. It would not save the gray wash. And it would not wake her father. It would only protect what was left. It was a plan of survival, not of victory. It was a plan of retreat. "The lower river is lost," Elara said, her voice full of sorrow. "And Leon, he is lost with it. We must accept this. We must save the headwaters. It is all we can do." Kaia listened, and the cold ash of her fear began to smolder again. A new, quieter anger began to burn. Lost? They were giving up? They would just hide behind a wall of magic while the river, their river, died? While her father faded away into nothing? The thought was unbearable. She looked at their faces, their wise, sad, accepting faces, and she saw not wisdom, but defeat. They had already surrendered. They were willing to cut off a part of their world to save themselves. They were willing to sacrifice her father. She stood up. Her legs were still weak, but she stood tall. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. "I will not accept it." The elders looked at her, their expressions unchanging. They saw a grieving child, lashing out with a pain they could not heal. They did not understand the shift that had happened within her. Her first rage had been a blind fire. This new feeling was different. It was a cold, hard point of light in the darkness. Her failure had taught her something. Power was not the answer. But giving up was not the answer either. There had to be another way. She left the circle. She did not look back. She knew they would not try to stop her. In their eyes, she was no threat. She was just a girl lost in her grief. She went back to her house, to the room where her father lay. The silence in the room felt different now. Before, it had been a source of pain. Now it was a question that needed an answer. She looked at his still face, at the man who had taught her everything. He had not taught her to give up. He had taught her to listen, and she had not been listening. She had been shouting. Her eyes fell upon his maps. They were kept in a large, rolled-up bundle of leather in the corner of the room. He had spent his life charting the river, not just its physical path, but its spiritual one. He had maps of its song, maps of its moods, maps of its dreams. She untied the leather cord and unrolled the maps across the wooden floor. They were beautiful, drawn by hand with inks made from berries and minerals. They showed every bend, every rapid, every quiet pool of the river in their valley. But there were other maps too, maps of the world beyond, maps of the gray wash. Her father had traveled there long ago when he was a young man. He had wanted to understand. His maps showed the river's path as it wound through the hard, sharp lines of human cities. The lines of the river were drawn with care and love, but the cities were drawn as dark, heavy shapes that crowded the water, choking it. She traced the river's path with her finger. It flowed past places with strange names, names that meant nothing to her. But her father had written notes in the margins. Here, he wrote, the song grows tired. Here the water forgets how to dream. And here, in the very center of the largest city, he had drawn a small circle and written a single word: heart. A new idea, clear and sharp, formed in her mind. The hush was not just a sickness, it was a wound in the river's heart. The elders wanted to build a wall to keep the sickness out. But you cannot heal a wound by building a wall around it. You have to go to the source of the pain. You have to find the heart and remind it how to beat. She knew what she had to do. The elders were wrong. Her own rage had been wrong. There was another way. It was a path no whisperer had taken in generations. It was a path of great danger, a path into a world that had forgotten magic. But it was the only path that led to hope. She made her choice. It was a quiet decision made in the silent room with her sleeping father. She would not stay. She would not hide. She would follow the river. She would walk into the gray wash. She would find the river's heart, and she would heal the wound. It was not just for the river anymore. It was for her father. She would not let him be lost. She would bring him back. Against the warnings of the elders, against the wisdom of her people, she decided to leave. She packed a small bag. She took a loaf of bread, a skin of fresh water from the source, and a single, small, smooth white stone from the bed of the great river. She also took one of her father's maps, the one that showed the path to the city. She rolled it carefully and tucked it into her bag. She went to her father's bedside one last time. She placed the white stone in his still hand. "I am going to bring you back," she whispered. His hand did not move. His face did not change. But for a fleeting moment, she thought she felt a faint, tiny echo. A whisper of a whisper, so quiet she could have imagined it. It was a feeling of love. It was enough. Under the cover of the deep, moonless night, Kaia left her home. She walked away from the circle of stones, away from the sleeping houses of her village, away from the safety of the valley. She set her face downstream and followed the path of the dying river, walking toward the great silence and the gray world of men. She was afraid, but for the first time since her father had fallen, she was also filled with a clear, sharp sense of purpose. Her journey had begun. Chapter 3. The Gray World. Kaia's journey began with the first step away from her home. The night was dark and deep, a familiar blanket of quiet that she had always found comforting. But this time, the quiet was different. It was not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping world. It was an empty quiet, a quiet that held the threat of the greater silence to come. She followed the path that ran alongside the great river. Here, in the lower parts of the valley, the river's song was already weak, a faint and wounded melody in the background of her thoughts. She walked for hours, her bare feet moving surely over the familiar soft earth and smooth stones. The air was still cool and sweet, carrying the scent of damp moss and night-blooming flowers. For a little while, she could almost pretend that she was just taking a long walk, that her father was safe in his bed, and that the world was whole. But the world was not whole, and the further she walked, the more she was reminded of it. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, she noticed the changes. They were small things at first. The trees began to stand a little farther apart from each other. The thick green undergrowth that covered the valley floor started to thin out, replaced by tougher, scragglier plants she did not recognize. The rich, dark soil gave way to a harder, stonier ground that was less forgiving under her feet. She saw the first piece of human trash nestled in the roots of a tree. It was a piece of bright blue cloth, its color so unnatural and loud against the greens and browns of the forest that it hurt her eyes. She stared at it for a long time. It was a sign, a marker of the border between her world and the world that had hurt her father. The sun rose, but it did not seem to bring the same warmth she was used to. The light seemed thinner, whiter, and with the light came new sounds. In the distance, she could hear a low, constant roar. It was not the sound of a waterfall or the wind in the trees. It was a flat, mechanical sound that had no life in it. It made the hairs on her arms stand up. The world was beginning to feel wrong, like a song played in a key that did not fit. The river beside her felt it too. Its song was a constant, low moan now. The moments of brightness and joy were gone completely. It was the sound of something in constant, weary pain. As the day wore on, the signs of the gray world became more common. She saw a long line of dark, hard ground that cut straight through a field. Huge, fast-moving metal beasts roared along this path, and the sound they made was deafening. She hid behind a cluster of rocks, her heart pounding as they rushed past. The people inside them were like ghosts, visible for only a second before they were gone. They did not look at the river. They did not look at the sky. They only looked at the dark path in front of them. This, she realized, was why they could not hear the world's song. They were moving too fast. They were trapped in their loud metal shells. The ground grew harder and harder until she was walking on a surface of gray stone that seemed to cover everything. The trees were gone, replaced by tall, straight poles with wires hanging between them. The plants that grew here were small and tough, pushing their way up through tiny cracks in the stone. They looked lonely and out of place. The air began to smell different. The sweet scent of earth and water was gone. Now, the air was sharp and bitter. It smelled of smoke and hot metal and something else, a sour smell of decay that was not the natural smell of fallen leaves returning to the soil. It was a dead smell. Her connection to the river, which had always been a source of comfort and strength, now became a source of unending pain. The river's song was no longer a song. It was a moan, a constant low thrum of misery that vibrated deep inside her bones. She could feel every piece of junk that was thrown into it. She felt a sharp stab of pain as a heavy object with sharp edges was tossed from a bridge, sinking into the river's soft bed. She felt a wave of sickness as a stream of oily, rainbow-colored liquid trickled into the water from a large pipe sticking out of the riverbank. The river did not have the strength to fight these things anymore. It just absorbed them, its pain growing deeper and duller with each new injury. She had to stop and rest more often now. The constant noise and the river's pain were draining her strength. Her bare feet, so used to the soft forest floor, were sore and cut from the hard, broken ground. She found a small patch of dusty grass behind a low stone wall and sat down. She drank some of the pure water from her water skin. It tasted of home, of life, of everything she had left behind. She closed her eyes and tried to whisper to the river beside her. In her valley, this was how she would soothe a stream that had been blocked by a fallen log. She would send a quiet feeling of comfort, a gentle hum of reassurance into the water. She reached out with her mind, gathering the small bit of peace she had left inside her. She offered it to the river, a tiny, gentle wave of warmth. She pushed it into the murky, slow-moving water, hoping to give it a moment of relief. It was like dropping a single drop of water into a vast, dry desert. The river's pain was so immense, so all-consuming, that her small offering was swallowed instantly, leaving no trace. The river did not even seem to notice. It was too sick to hear, too lost in its own misery to feel her touch. The feeling of failure was a cold weight in her stomach. Her one skill, the very thing that made her a whisperer, was useless here. She was not a healer. She was just a witness to the river's slow death. As evening approached, the gray world grew even stranger. Thousands of tiny, artificial suns blinked on, casting a harsh yellow light over everything. The darkness never truly came. The sky glowed with a sick orange haze that blocked out the stars. Kaia had never been without the stars before. She felt a deep sense of loss, as if a whole part of the world had been stolen from her. The night was not a time of rest here. The loud noises continued. The fast metal beasts still roared along their dark paths. The world of men did not sleep. She needed to find a place to rest, a place where she could be hidden. The constant feeling of being watched by unseen eyes was wearing her down. She followed the river until she came to a large bridge. It was a huge, ugly thing made of dark metal and crumbling stone. Underneath it, in the deep shadows, the world was a little quieter. The roar of the metal beasts passing overhead was a dull thunder. But here, by the water's edge, she could find a small pocket of stillness. The ground was damp and smelled of decay, but it was a place to hide. She found a spot where the shadows were deepest, behind a large stone support that was covered in strange, colorful markings. She curled up into a small ball, pulling her thin cloak tightly around her. She was truly alone. It was a kind of alone she had never known. In her valley, even when she was by herself, she was never truly alone. She always had the company of the trees, the animals, the wind, and most of all, the river. The world was always speaking to her, always singing its song to her. But here, there was no song. There was only noise. The world was not speaking. It was screaming. And she was a stranger here, a tiny living thing in a world made of dead stone and angry metal. The confidence and purpose she had felt when she left her home felt like a distant dream. She had been so sure that she could make a difference, that she could find the river's heart and heal it. Now, faced with the sheer size of the sickness, she felt small and powerless. Her hope, which had been a bright, cold flame inside her, began to fade. The fire was dying, leaving only the cold ash of fear. What was she doing here? She was just one girl. How could she possibly heal a wound this large? The elders had been right. It was a fool's errand. She should have stayed. She should have helped them build their magical wall. At least then she would be safe. At least then she would be home, surrounded by the people she knew and the last echoes of the song she loved. Here, there was nothing for her but pain and fear. The thought of turning back was a sweet temptation. She could just walk away. She could follow the river back upstream, back to the green and the quiet. But then, she thought of her father. She pictured his still face, his empty form lying in his quiet room. The elders had called him lost. They were willing to leave him in the silence. If she went back, she would be doing the same thing. She would be accepting that he was gone forever. The thought sent a fresh wave of pain through her, but this pain was different. It was sharp and clear. It was the pain of love. It was the one thing that the hush could not swallow. She held on to that feeling. She clutched it like the small, smooth stone she had left in his hand. It was a tiny light in the overwhelming darkness. She did not know if she could succeed. She did not even know what success would look like. but she knew she could not go back. Not yet. She had made a promise, whispered in a silent room. She would not break it. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the harsh yellow light and the constant dull roar from the bridge above. She tried to find a place of quiet inside herself. It was difficult. The river's pain was a constant companion, a dull ache in the back of her mind. The strange, angry sounds of the city were a relentless assault on her senses. But slowly, exhaustedly, she drifted into a troubled sleep. Her dreams were filled with images of gray stone, rushing metal, and the sad, tired eyes of a forgotten river. Her first day in the gray world was over, and it had taken almost everything she had. Chapter 4: The Boy and the Bridge. Kaia woke to a world that was just as gray and loud as the one she had fallen asleep in. The dull roar of the metal beasts on the bridge above was a constant, oppressive ceiling of sound. A thin, gray light filtered under the bridge, showing a world drained of all color. The air was damp and cold, and the smell of wet, decaying things was stronger in the morning. She sat up, her body stiff and sore from sleeping on the hard ground. A feeling of deep weariness settled over her, not just in her body, but in her spirit. The hope she had clung to before sleep felt thin and fragile now, like a spider's web in a storm. She felt a deep, pulling urge to simply give up, to lie back down and let the gray world wash over her until she disappeared. She was watching the slow, oily movement of the river when a small sound broke through the monotonous roar from above. It was the sound of a stone skittering across the concrete. Kaia froze, her body tensing. She pressed herself back into the shadows of the large stone support, trying to make herself invisible. Her people were not used to being seen. They lived their lives in harmony with their surroundings, moving as quietly as the wind. Here, in this world of hard surfaces and loud noises, she felt exposed and vulnerable. She held her breath, listening. A small figure appeared at the edge of the bridge's shadow, silhouetted against the pale morning light. It was a boy. He could not have been more than 10 years old. He was small and thin, with messy brown hair that stuck out in all directions. He wore clothes that were a strange collection of colors, faded and worn. He was alone. He did not seem to be going anywhere. He just stood there, looking at the dirty river. Kaia watched him, her fear mixing with a flicker of curiosity. What was a child doing here, in this forgotten, ugly place? The boy, whose name was Leo, did not see her. He was used to being alone here. This spot under the bridge was his secret place, his escape. His home was in one of the tall, gray buildings nearby, a small box full of noise and the arguments of his parents. The school he went to was another box, full of rules and ringing bells. Here, under the bridge, the world was quieter. The roar from above was a constant, predictable sound, which was better than the sudden, angry sounds of his apartment. He liked the river. He knew it was dirty. He knew it smelled bad. But it was the only piece of the wild world he had ever really known. It was always moving, always changing. He would come here and watch the pieces of trash float by, imagining they were ships on a long journey. He walked closer to the water's edge, his worn shoes crunching on the gravel and broken glass. He had a small, flat stone in his hand. He was looking for the perfect spot to skip it across the water's surface. He was concentrating so hard on the river that he did not notice Kaia until he was only a few feet away from her hiding place. He stopped suddenly, his eyes widening. He had not expected to see anyone here. Kaia's heart pounded in her chest. Her first instinct was to run, to disappear back into the shadows. Her father had always told her that the world of men was a place of danger. The people who lived in it had forgotten the ways of the earth, and things they did not understand, they often feared or destroyed. She stayed perfectly still, hoping he would be scared and run away. But the boy did not run. After a moment of surprise, his fear was replaced by a look of simple, open curiosity. He tilted his head, looking at her as if she were a strange, interesting bird he had never seen before. He saw a girl with long, dark hair and eyes the color of deep water. She was wearing simple, earth-toned clothes that looked like they were made of leaves and bark. Her feet were bare, and she was pressed against the stone wall as if she were trying to merge with it. She looked scared, but also strong, like a wild animal. He was not afraid of her. He had a gentle heart, a heart that was often lonely. He was more interested than scared. He took a small step closer. "Hello," he said. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the noise from the bridge. Kaia flinched at the sound. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her. She did not answer. She just watched him, her eyes wide and wary. Leo waited for a moment. When she did not speak, he tried again. "Are you okay?" he asked. He pointed at her bare feet. "You don't have any shoes?" His simple question seemed to break the spell of her fear. He was not a threat. He was just a child. His concern was so genuine, so uncomplicated, that it disarmed her. She slowly uncurled herself from her defensive position, though she did not move away from the wall. She still did not speak. Words felt strange and heavy in her mouth. In her world, they used words sparingly. So much could be said without them, through feeling, through the song of things. Leo seemed to understand that she did not want to talk. He did not push her. He just gave her a small, shy smile. Then he turned his attention back to the river. He took the flat stone from his pocket, drew his arm back, and with a flick of his wrist, sent it skipping across the murky water. 1, 2, 3, 4 skips. It was a good throw. He smiled to himself, proud of the small accomplishment. He then sat down on a large, flat piece of broken concrete a few feet away from her, his legs dangling over the edge. He did not look at her directly, but she knew he was aware of her. He was giving her space. They sat in silence for a long time. It was a strange kind of shared silence. Above them, the city roared. Beside them, the river moaned its sad, sick song. But between the two of them, in the small space under the bridge, there was a different kind of quiet. It was a quiet of waiting, of watching. Kaia found herself relaxing, just a little. The boy's presence was not intrusive. He was not demanding anything from her. He was just there, sharing the same forgotten space. She watched him as he pulled a small, slightly squashed sandwich from his pocket and began to eat it. He ate slowly, taking small bites and looking at the river. As she watched him, she saw something she had not seen since leaving her home. She saw a glimmer of connection. The boy was not just looking at the river. He was seeing it. He saw the way the light reflected off a patch of oil, making a rainbow. He saw a small, brave weed pushing its way through a crack in the concrete at the water's edge. He pointed at it, not to her, but to himself. "Flower," he whispered. Kaia looked at the plant. It was a small, tough thing with a tiny yellow flower. In her world, it would have been overlooked, a common weed. But here, in this desert of stone and decay, it was a miracle. It was a tiny spark of life in a world of dead things. And this boy, this human boy, he saw it. He saw its beauty. The thought was so surprising that it made a small crack in the wall of despair she had built around herself. Her father had told her that all humans had forgotten. But this boy had not forgotten. He was still listening in his own small way. Leo finished his sandwich. He carefully folded the wrapping paper and put it back in his pocket. He did not throw it on the ground. This small act of care was another surprise. It was a sign of respect. He then looked over at her. He saw that she was watching him, her wariness replaced by a deep, thoughtful expression. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out an apple. It was red and shiny. He held it out to her. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Kaia stared at the apple. It was a simple offering, a gesture of kindness. She had not eaten since the small loaf of bread she had packed, and she was weak with hunger. Her mind told her to be cautious, to not trust him. But her heart and her empty stomach felt something different. She slowly reached out and took the apple from his hand. Her fingers brushed against his, and for a moment she felt a flicker of his own life song. It was not the deep, resonant song of her people connected to the earth. It was a smaller, quieter song, a bit lonely, a bit sad, but it was bright and clear. It was the song of a good heart. She took the apple and nodded her thanks. The simple act of connection, of accepting his gift, felt momentous. She took a bite. The apple was sweet and crisp, and the taste of it was a wonderful shock after the stale, bitter air she had been breathing. She ate the whole thing, core and all, just as she would have at home. Leo watched her, a wide smile spreading across his face. He was happy that she had accepted his gift. He felt a little less lonely. They spent the rest of the morning in their shared quiet. Leo found more flat stones and skipped them across the water. Kaia watched him, feeling the hard knot of fear inside her slowly begin to loosen. He was just a boy. He was not part of the noise and the anger and the forgetting. He was something else. He was a small, quiet song in the middle of a great, terrible noise. As the sun rose higher, casting longer shadows under the bridge, Leo knew he had to leave. He would be late for school. He stood up and brushed the dust from his pants. He looked at Kaia, who was still sitting by the stone support. "I have to go," he said. "Will you be here later?" Kaia looked at him. She did not know what to say. She did not know where she would be. She was just following the river. She gave a small, uncertain shrug. Leo seemed to understand. "Okay," he said. "Well, maybe I'll see you." He started to walk away, but then he stopped and turned back. He pointed at her again. "My name is Leo," he said. Then he pointed at her, a questioning look on his face. He wanted to know her name. Kaia hesitated for a long time. A name was a powerful thing. It was a part of her song. But this boy had shown her kindness. He had shared his food. He had shared his quiet place. He deserved an answer. "Kaia," she whispered. Her voice was rough from disuse, but the name came out clear and true. Leo smiled, a bright, happy smile that made his whole face light up. "Kaia," he repeated, testing the sound of it. "That's a nice name." And then he turned and ran, his small figure quickly disappearing into the gray light of the city. Kaia was alone again, but the feeling was different now. The crushing weight of the city's loneliness had lifted, just a little. She had made a connection, a small, fragile connection, but it was real. The boy, Leo, was a spark, a tiny point of light in the overwhelming darkness. He had shown her that the human world was not just one single terrible thing. It was not all noise and anger and forgetting. It was made of individuals, and some of those individuals still had songs in their hearts. They had just forgotten how to listen to them. She looked at the river, at its slow, sad current. Her task still seemed impossible. The river's sickness was vast and deep, but her perspective had shifted. Before, she had only seen the sickness. Now, she saw the small, brave flower growing in the crack. She saw the care in a boy who put his trash in his pocket. She saw the kindness in a shared apple. These things were not enough to heal the river, but they were a beginning. They were the first, faint notes of a song that had been silent for a long time. Her journey was still long and filled with uncertainty, but for the first time since leaving her home, she did not feel completely alone. She had found a friend, and in this gray, forgotten place, that was a magic all its own. Chapter 5: The River's Heart. Kaia did not stay under the bridge. The meeting with Leo had given her a small sliver of strength, a renewed sense of purpose that pushed back against her weariness. She could not just hide in the shadows and wait. She had to keep moving, to keep following the river toward the place her father had marked on his map. The word he had written, heart, was a constant whisper in her mind. It was a destination, a puzzle she needed to solve. What was the river's heart? Was it a physical place, a hidden spring, a magical object? Or was it something else entirely? She did not know, but she knew she would not find the answer by staying still. She continued her journey, walking along the broken, forgotten banks of the Grey Wash. The city grew denser and taller around her. The small, squat buildings gave way to towering structures of glass and steel that seemed to scrape against the pale, hazy sky. The noise grew louder, a relentless symphony of harsh sounds that grated on her nerves. The roar of the metal beasts was now joined by the shrill scream of sirens, the deep clang of construction, and the constant, indistinct murmur of thousands of human voices, a sound like a swarm of angry insects. She tried to block it out, to find a place of quiet inside herself, but it was like trying to find silence in the middle of a thunderstorm. Her path was not easy. The riverbank was not a clear trail like the one in her valley. Here, it was a chaotic jumble of obstacles. She had to climb over mountains of discarded junk, navigate through thickets of thorny, unnatural weeds, and squeeze past huge, humming metal boxes that smelled of hot oil. Sometimes the path would disappear completely, blocked by a tall fence or a massive stone wall that ran right down to the water's edge. When this happened, she would have to turn away from the river, her only guide, and venture into the maze of the city's streets to find her way back to it. These detours were the most terrifying part of her journey. The streets were rivers of a different kind, filled with a fast-moving current of people. They rushed past her, their faces closed and hard, their eyes focused on something in the distance or on the small, glowing rectangles they held in their hands. They did not see her. They did not see the sky above them or the ground beneath their feet. They were each trapped in their own small, hurried world. The feeling of being invisible in a crowd was a new and deeply unsettling kind of loneliness. She felt like a ghost, a whisper of a world that no one else could see or hear. She would keep her head down, her hand resting on the small bag that held her father's map, and move as quickly as she could until she found her way back to the familiar, sad song of the river. Days turned into a blur of gray stone, loud noises, and the constant aching pain of the water. She learned to be resourceful. She found food where she could, mostly from the overflowing bins behind buildings that sold food. At first, the idea of eating the discarded food of these people felt wrong, but her hunger was a powerful force. She would find fruit that was only slightly bruised, or bread that was a day old. She learned to tell what was safe and what was not. She found water from pipes that dripped clean water, and she would fill her water skin, always cherishing the small taste of purity in this dirty world. She slept in hidden places, under bridges, in overgrown parks, or behind forgotten buildings, always staying close to the river. She saw Leo several times. He would come to the river after school, looking for her. Sometimes he would find her, sometimes he would not. Their meetings were always quiet. He would bring her food, an apple or a piece of bread he had saved from his lunch. He did not ask her where she came from or where she was going. He seemed to understand that her story was not a simple one. He would just sit with her, skipping stones and telling her about his day. He told her about his teacher, about a book he was reading, about a dog he saw on the street. His small stories were like tiny windows into his world, a world that was not as gray and hard as it first appeared. Through Leo, Kaia's understanding of the human world began to change. It was not a single, monstrous thing. It was complicated. It was full of contradictions. It was a place of great ugliness, of forgotten beauty, of deep loneliness, and of small, surprising acts of kindness. She saw a woman stop to feed a flock of pigeons. She saw a man tending to a small box of bright red flowers on his windowsill, high up on a tall gray building. These were small things, tiny sparks of connection in the overwhelming noise. But they were there. The song of life was not completely gone from this world. It was just very, very quiet. One day, as they were sitting by the river, Kaia decided to ask for his help. She had been walking for what felt like a very long time, and while she was getting closer to the center of the city, she felt no closer to understanding what the river's heart was. The river's pain was a constant, dull roar in her mind, and she was growing weaker, worn down by the constant struggle. She trusted Leo. He was her only friend in this strange, loud world. She carefully took out her father's map. It was worn and creased from her journey. She unrolled it on the ground between them. Leo's eyes went wide. He had never seen a map like it. It was drawn by hand with a kind of life and beauty that was missing from the flat printed maps he saw at school. He saw the way the river was drawn not as a simple blue line, but as a living, flowing thing. Kaia pointed to the part of the map that showed the city. "I am looking for a place," she said, her voice quiet. "My father told me it was the river's heart." She pointed to the small circle he had drawn, right in the busiest, densest part of the city. Leo looked at the map. Then he looked at her, a puzzled expression on his face. "The heart of the river?" he asked. "What does that mean?" Kaia struggled to find the words. How could she explain the song of the water to someone who had never heard it? "It is the place where the river is most itself," she said finally. "The place where its song should be the strongest." Leo still looked confused. The river to him was just dirty water. It did not have a song. But he saw the desperate hope in Kaia's eyes. He saw that this was important to her, more important than anything. He did not need to understand the magic of it to want to help his friend. He looked closely at the map, tracing the river's path with his small finger. He recognized the shapes of the bridges and the bends in the river. "I think I know where this is," he said slowly. "This part of the river is old. They call it the Industrial Canal now. It's behind the old factories. Nobody goes there anymore. My mom says it's dangerous." Kaia's heart beat a little faster. The Industrial Canal. The name sounded ugly and dead, but it was a lead. It was a direction. "Can you take me there?" she asked. Leo hesitated for a moment. He was a little scared. But then he looked at Kaia's determined face, and he nodded. "Okay," he said, "but we have to be careful." He could not take her then. He had to go home. But he promised to meet her the next day, a Saturday, when he did not have school. That night, Kaia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was close. She could feel it. The river's heart was within her reach. She just had to be brave enough to find it. The next morning, Leo met her as promised. He led her away from the familiar banks of the river and into the heart of the city. The buildings were taller here, packed so tightly together that they blocked out the sun. The streets were narrow canyons of stone and glass. The noise was a physical force, a constant pressure on her ears. The crowds were thicker, a river of people that she and Leo had to navigate through. Leo moved through it all with a confidence that surprised her. This was his world. He knew its rhythms, its dangers, and its hidden paths. He led her through a maze of narrow alleyways and down flights of steep, crumbling stone steps. The air grew thicker, smelling of rust and old, stagnant water. They came to a tall, spiked iron fence. A large sign with faded red letters warned them to keep out. Leo pointed to a place where the fence was bent and broken. "We can get through here," he whispered. They squeezed through the gap and found themselves in a different world. It was a place of silence. It was not the living silence of her valley, but a dead, heavy silence. They were standing in a vast yard of cracked concrete, surrounded by the hulking skeletal remains of old factories. The buildings were huge, dark shapes with broken windows that looked like empty eyes. Rust covered everything, staining the walls in long, weeping streaks of orange and brown. It was a graveyard of industry, a place where the loud, angry machines of the city had finally died. And in the middle of it all was the river. It was hardly recognizable. It was not a flowing body of water anymore. It was a narrow, straight channel, trapped between high, sheer walls of stone. The water was almost black, and it barely seemed to move. A thick, foul-smelling sludge covered the bottom, and patches of iridescent scum floated on the surface. There was no life here. No plants grew on the stone banks. No birds sang in the empty sky. This was the place her father had called the heart. Kaia felt a wave of despair so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. This was not a place of strength. This was a place of death. The river's song was completely, utterly gone. There was not even a moan of pain anymore. There was only a void, a complete and total absence of life. This was the source of the hush. This was the wound, and it was far worse than she could have ever imagined. She stumbled toward the edge of the channel, her heart aching. This was it. This was the end of her journey. She had found the heart, and the heart was dead. Her quest was a failure. Her father was truly lost. She felt the tears welling up in her eyes, hot and bitter. Leo stood beside her, his small face full of concern. He did not understand what she was feeling, but he could see her pain. He looked at the dead water and the decaying buildings. To him, it was just an ugly, forgotten place. But then he remembered something. "My grandmother told me a story about this place," he said quietly. Kaia barely heard him. She was lost in her own grief, but Leo kept talking. "She said that a long, long time ago. This wasn't here." He waved his hand at the factories and the stone channel. "She said the river was wide and clean. There were trees all along the banks. And right here," he pointed to the spot where they were standing, "was the heart of the town. People would come here to swim in the summer. They would have picnics on the grass. They fished here. She said they used to have a big festival every year, the River Festival, to celebrate the water that gave the town its life." Kaia's head came up slowly. She looked at Leo, really looked at him, for the first time since they had arrived. His words were a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. She looked around at the urban wasteland and tried to imagine it as he described. She tried to see the green trees instead of the rusting metal. She tried to hear the sounds of laughter and music instead of the dead silence. Leo continued, his voice full of the wonder of a story passed down. "My grandmother has pictures," he said, "old ones. They're all black and white. She showed them to me once. Everyone looks so happy." He took her to his grandmother later that day. The old woman lived in a small, clean apartment filled with old furniture and the smell of lavender. She had kind, wrinkled eyes and a warm smile. She remembered Leo's stories about the strange girl from the river. She looked at Kaia with a gentle curiosity, not with fear. The grandmother, whose name was Alina, brought out a large, dusty photo album. She opened it on her lap, and page by page, she showed Kaia the world that was lost. The photographs were faded, their edges soft and brown. But the life in them was clear. They showed men and women and children splashing in a wide, sun-dappled river. They showed families sitting on checkered blankets under the shade of big, leafy trees. They showed fishermen holding up large, silvery fish, their faces beaming with pride. They showed the whole town gathered for the festival, with paper lanterns strung between the trees and people dancing on the riverbank. In every picture, the river was the center of everything. It was a source of joy, of food, of life. It was a part of their community. It was loved. As Kaia looked at these images, a profound realization washed over her. It was so simple and so powerful that it took her breath away. The river's heart was not a place. It was not a magical object. The river's heart was the love of the people. The song of the river was not just its own life force. It was a reflection of the connection it had with the world around it. The whisperers in her valley loved the river, so its song there was strong and beautiful. But here, the people had forgotten. They had turned their backs on the river. They had caged it in stone, poisoned it with their waste, and built their loud gray world on top of it. They had stopped loving it, and when their love died, the river's heart had broken. The hush was not a curse or a monster. It was the sound of a broken heart. It was the sound of being utterly and completely forgotten. Her mission was not to find a thing, but to restore a feeling. Her magic, the magic of the whisperers, was not enough. She could not force the river to sing. She could not command the people to love it. The healing had to come from them. She had to find a way to make them remember. She had to help them find their own song again and join it with the rivers. The path forward was no longer a line on a map. It was a new, terrifying, and uncertain journey into the hearts of men. And she had no idea how to begin. But as she looked at the faded photograph of a smiling child dipping her toes in the clean water, she knew she had to try. Chapter 6. The First Stone. The visit to Leo's grandmother changed everything for Kaia. The faded photographs in the old album were more powerful than any magic she had ever known. They showed her the truth. They gave a face to the silence. The emptiness that plagued the river was not a void, but a memory of a love that had been lost. Her journey was no longer about finding a single point on a map. It was about trying to mend a connection that had been broken for a long, long time. The task felt even bigger now, even more impossible. How could one girl, a stranger in a strange land, remind an entire city to love something it had forgotten? The weight of this new understanding was heavy, But it was a different kind of weight than the despair she had felt before. This was the weight of purpose. She left Elena's apartment with a quiet determination. The old woman had looked at her with knowing, kind eyes as she left, pressing a small bag of sweet homemade cookies into her hands. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a blessing. Kaia knew she could not return to her hiding place under the bridge. That was a place of waiting, of hiding. Her time for hiding was over. She needed a new plan, a new way of acting in this world. Her old way, the way of the whisperers, was to listen and to gently guide the forces of nature. But here, nature was buried under so much stone and noise that it could not be heard. She could not use her magic to command the river back to health. She had learned that much from her failed attempt at the border of her valley, and she could not command the people. She had seen their closed faces and their hurried walks. They would not listen to a strange girl in unusual clothes. She walked through the city, her mind racing. She needed to do something. But what? How do you start to fix something so broken? She thought about the stories Elena had told, the pictures of the community gathered by the water. The healing had come from them, from their shared love and attention. The sickness had come when they had turned away. The answer then had to be in turning them back. She had to find a way to make them look at the river again, not with disgust or with indifference, but with new eyes. Her path eventually led her back to the river's edge. She did not go to the Dead Heart, the industrial canal. That place was too full of sorrow. She went to a place she and Leo had often sat, a small, neglected stretch of bank not far from the bridge where they had first met. It was a typical part of the Grey Wash. The bank was a steep, muddy slope littered with trash. Plastic bags like pale, sad ghosts were tangled in the exposed roots of a few struggling trees. Empty bottles, some whole, some broken, glinted in the pale sunlight. The rusted shell of a shopping cart lay half submerged in the murky water. It was an ugly, forgotten place. She stood there for a long time, just looking. She was not listening for a song anymore. She was just seeing. She saw the ugliness. She saw the neglect. But she also saw the river, still moving, still flowing, however slowly. It was still alive, underneath all the filth. It was still trying. This small, sad piece of the world felt like the right place to start. It was not the dead heart. It was just a wounded limb. And maybe, just maybe, a small wound was something she could begin to tend. She remembered something her father had once told her. He said, "The greatest change does not begin with a storm, but with the turning of a single stone." It was a lesson about patience, about the power of small, consistent actions. She had been looking for the storm, the grand magical act that would fix everything at once. But that was not the way. The way was smaller. The way was quieter. She looked down at her feet. Near the water's edge was a green glass bottle, half filled with brown, stagnant water. It was just one piece of trash among thousands. It was meaningless in the grand scheme of the river's sickness. But it was there. It was in front of her. Without thinking too much about it, she bent down. Her fingers closed around the cool, smooth glass. She pulled it from the mud. It made a soft, sucking sound as it came free. She stood up, holding it in her hand. Then she walked over to a metal bin that was overflowing with other people's garbage, and she dropped it inside. It made a hollow, clinking sound as it landed. That was it. That was the action. It was so small, so insignificant, that it felt almost foolish. Nothing had changed. The river was still sick. The bank was still covered in trash. The city still roared around her. But she had done something. She had turned a single stone. She had removed one small piece of the ugliness. A new feeling began to grow inside her. It was not the fierce, hot anger she had felt before, nor the cold, heavy despair. It was a quiet, steady warmth, the feeling of purpose. She took a deep breath of the foul city air, and then she bent down and picked up another piece of trash. It was a crumpled piece of paper, soaked and brown. She put it in the bin. Then she picked up a plastic container, then a twisted piece of metal. She did not use magic. She did not try to whisper to the river. She just used her hands. She worked slowly, methodically. She focused only on the small patch of ground in front of her. Each piece of trash she removed was a small victory, a tiny act of defiance against the great forgetting. She worked for hours. The sun moved across the sky. People walked past on the path above the riverbank, but no one paid her any attention. She was just a strange girl doing a strange, pointless thing. They did not see the importance of her task, but she did. She was not just cleaning a patch of dirt. She was showing the river that someone still cared. She was making a promise. The next day, Leo found her in the same spot. She had cleared a small area about the size of a large blanket. It was not perfectly clean, but it was noticeably different from the trash-strewn ground around it. The dark, rich earth was visible underneath. Leo stopped and stared. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice full of surprise. "I am cleaning," Kaia said simply. Her answer was so plain, so direct, that it seemed to confuse him. "Why?" he asked. "It's just going to get dirty again." He was not being unkind. He was being practical. He had lived in this world his whole life. He knew how it worked. People threw their trash everywhere. Cleaning one small spot seemed like a hopeless task. "Maybe," Kaia said. She did not look up from her work. She was pulling a long piece of plastic sheeting from the muddy bank. "But it is clean now." Her simple logic seemed to stop him. He looked at the small, clean patch of earth. He looked at the endless stretch of dirty riverbank. And then he looked at Kaia, at her determined face and her muddy hands. He saw that this was not just a task for her. It was something important. He did not fully understand it, but he understood her. He understood his friend. He put down the bag he was carrying and walked down the muddy slope to where she was working. He did not say anything else. He just bent down and picked up an empty can. He looked at it for a moment, then he walked over to the bin and threw it in. He came back and picked up a plastic bottle. Kaia watched him, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in a very long time. She was not alone in her work anymore. Together, they cleaned. It was slow, dirty work. They filled the overflowing bin, so they started a new pile against the stone wall. They worked in a comfortable silence, broken only by the grunts of effort as they pulled a particularly stubborn piece of junk from the mud. They were a strange sight, the wild-looking girl with the deep, serious eyes and the small city boy in the worn-out sneakers. A few people walking by paused to look at them. One older man in a suit shook his head and scoffed, as if their effort was an insult to his intelligence. He saw their work as foolish, a child's game. But then, a woman walking her small dog stopped. She watched them for a long time. She saw their focus, their shared purpose. She saw the small patch of clean earth they were creating. "Good for you," she said, her voice warm. The words were a surprise. Kaia looked up, startled to be addressed by a stranger. The woman smiled at her. Then, she bent down, picked up a discarded newspaper that was blowing near her feet, and tucked it under her arm to throw away later. She did not stay to help, but her small act of approval, her own small turning of a stone, felt like a huge victory. Someone else had seen. Someone else had understood, even just a little. This became their routine. Every day after school, Leo would meet Kaia by the river and they would clean. The small patch of clean earth grew larger. It became a space the size of a small room. It was an island of care in an ocean of neglect. They found treasures in the trash. They found a small ceramic bird with a broken wing, which Leo decided to keep. They found a glass marble that shone with a rainbow of colors when the sun hit it. These small, beautiful things, lost in the ugliness, felt like symbols of hope. The work was changing Kaia. The physical labor grounded her. It tired her body in a good way, and it quieted the constant ache in her mind. Her hands were calloused, and her muscles were sore, but she felt stronger than she had in a long time. She was no longer just a passive victim of the river's pain. She was an active participant in its healing, however small. This was a new kind of magic. It was not the grand, powerful magic of her people. It was a slow, quiet, human magic, the magic of showing up, the magic of caring. Leo was changing too. He had always been a quiet, observant boy. But this work gave him a sense of agency, of power. He was not just a small boy in a big, loud city anymore. He was a caretaker. He was a healer. He started to talk to his friends at school about what he was doing. At first, they laughed at him. Why would he want to spend his time cleaning up that smelly old river? But Leo was persistent. He told them about Kaia. He told them about the clean patch of earth. He told them about the ceramic bird with the broken wing. His quiet passion was contagious. One day he showed up with two of his friends. They were hesitant at first, unsure of what to do. They looked at Kaia with a mixture of fear and fascination. But Leo showed them. He gave them bags and told them where to start. Soon, the three of them were working alongside Kaia, their initial awkwardness replaced by a sense of shared purpose. The work went faster with more hands. The island of green grew. They were no longer invisible. They were a small, dedicated team. More people started to notice them. Some still scoffed, but others would watch with a quiet curiosity. The woman with the dog became a regular visitor. She would always stop and say a few words of encouragement. Sometimes she would bring them a bottle of cold water on a hot day. Their small act of defiance was creating a ripple. It was a tiny ripple in a vast, still pond, but it was there. It was a movement. It was the beginning of a change. Kaia did not know if this was enough. She did not know if cleaning one small part of the riverbank would ever be enough to wake her father or heal the river's heart. But as she worked side by side with her new friends, she felt the first faint stirrings of a new song. It was not coming from the river. It was coming from them. It was the quiet, hopeful song of a few people who had decided to care. And it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Chapter 7. The Song Returns. The small ripple that Kaia and Leo had started began to grow. The change was slow, almost too slow to notice day by day, but over weeks it became undeniable. Their small patch of clean earth was no longer a small patch. It had spread, inch by inch, foot by foot, until a significant stretch of the riverbank was free from the worst of the trash. The dark, rich soil, nourished by the river for years, was finally able to breathe. Tiny green shoots of grass began to push their way through the dirt, a startling and beautiful sight against the backdrop of the gray city. The few struggling trees on the bank seemed to stand a little taller, their leaves looking a healthier shade of green. The air in this one small spot did not smell quite as sour. It was as if a small corner of the world was slowly waking up from a long, bad dream. The group of helpers grew as well. Leo's 2 friends became 4, then 6. They were a small, dedicated army of children, armed with garbage bags and a surprising amount of determination. They made a game of it, competing to see who could find the strangest piece of trash or who could fill their bag the fastest. But underneath the games, there was a real sense of pride in what they were doing. They were taking a piece of their world, a piece that all the adults had dismissed as ugly and worthless, and they were making it beautiful again. They were creating their own special place. Kaia was their quiet leader. She never told them what to do, but her steady, tireless work was an inspiration. They would watch her, the strange, silent girl who seemed to be listening to a sound no one else could hear. They were a little in awe of her. She was different from anyone they had ever met. She moved with a grace and a purpose that made them feel like they were part of something important, something more than just a cleanup project. She was teaching them, without words, how to see the world in a new way. She would often pause in her work and point out something small they would have otherwise missed. She would show them a spider spinning a complex, beautiful web in a thorny bush, or the way the afternoon light made the river water shimmer, even through the murk. She was showing them that life and beauty was still here. They just had to learn how to look for it. The adults in the community began to take notice in a more significant way. The woman with the dog had told her friends about the children. Other people who walked or jogged along the path above the river saw the change happening below. A small article with a blurry picture of the kids at work appeared in a local neighborhood newspaper. The story was simple. It just described how a group of children had decided to clean up the riverbank that everyone else had ignored. It did not talk about magic or broken hearts. It just talked about kids who cared. This small piece of public attention was a turning point. It made their project real to the wider community. It was no longer just a few kids playing in the dirt. It was an event. An elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood his whole life came down to the riverbank one afternoon. He leaned on his cane and watched them for a long time. Then he approached Leo. He told them that he remembered playing by this very river when he was a boy. He remembered catching fish here. His voice was full of a sad nostalgia. The next day, he came back with a sturdy rake and a box of thick work gloves for the children. He could not bend down to help them himself, but he wanted to contribute. His small act of support opened a door. Other adults started to get involved. A local hardware store donated a dozen large, heavy-duty trash bags. A woman who owned a small cafe nearby started bringing them lemonade and sandwiches on hot days. They were not just a group of kids anymore. They were a community project. The small ripple was turning into a wave. Leo, emboldened by the support, had an idea. His grandmother, Alina, had been telling him more stories about the old days, about the river festival. He thought, why couldn't they have a festival again? Not a big one, but a small celebration of the river, a way to show everyone the work they had done and to remind them of what the river used to be. He talked to Kaia about it first. She was hesitant. The idea of a crowd of people, of loud noises and a celebration was overwhelming to her. But she saw the excitement in Leo's eyes. She saw that this was the natural next step. Their quiet work had been about removing the ugliness. Now it was time to invite the beauty back in. With the help of Alina and the other supportive adults, they began to plan. They called it River Remembrance Day. They made simple, colorful posters by hand and put them up in local shops and on community notice boards. The posters invited everyone to come down to the riverbank on a Saturday afternoon to help with the cleanup and to share stories about the river. They did not promise a big party. They just promised a chance to connect. The day of the event arrived, bright and sunny. Kaia was nervous. She hid in the background, watching as people began to arrive. At first, it was just a small trickle. The children and their parents, the elderly man with the rake, the woman with the dog. But then, more people came. People from the neighborhood who were curious. People who had read the article in the paper. Soon, the cleaned-off riverbank was filled with a crowd of people, a mix of all ages and backgrounds. It was a strange and wonderful sight. People who had probably walked past each other on the street 100 times without a second glance were now working side by side, picking up trash and pulling weeds. The atmosphere was not one of chore, but of a cheerful, shared effort. The sound of their laughter and conversation filled the air. A young man had brought a guitar, and he sat on a large, flat rock, playing simple, happy folk songs. His music was a gentle, living sound that seemed to push back against the harsh, mechanical roar of the city. Elena was the heart of the event. She had brought her old photo album, and a crowd of people gathered around her as she sat on a bench, pointing to the faded pictures and telling her stories. She spoke of a time when the river was the center of their lives, a place of joy and community. As people listened, their faces began to change. They were not just looking at an old woman's memories. They were seeing a vision of what their own community could be. They were remembering a part of themselves they had forgotten. As the afternoon wore on, something magical began to happen. Kaia felt it first. It was a faint, deep hum coming from the river itself. It was so quiet that at first she thought she was imagining it. She moved closer to the water's edge, away from the crowd, and closed her eyes, focusing all of her senses. There it was again. It was not the moan of pain she had grown so used to. It was a different sound. It was a note of surprise, of curiosity. The river, which had been silent and unresponsive for so long, was beginning to wake up. It had felt the change. It had felt the attention. It had felt the care of the people on its banks. The feeling grew stronger. The low hum began to take on a rhythm, a slow, deep pulse, like a sleeping heart that was just beginning to beat again. The people felt it too, though they did not understand it in the way Kaia did. They felt it as a shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed to become a little cleaner, a little fresher. The sunlight on the water seemed to sparkle a little brighter. A cool, gentle breeze began to blow up from the river, carrying with it a faint, clean smell that had been absent for decades. They felt a sense of peace, of rightness. They felt a connection, not just to each other, but to the place itself. They felt like they belonged there. Kaia walked to the very edge of the water. She knelt down and placed her hands in the river. For months, this act had brought her only pain. The water had felt thick, cold, and dead. But now, it felt different. It was still cool, but there was a current of warmth flowing within it. A faint but definite vibration of life. She did not try to push her own song into it. She did not try to command it. She simply opened her heart and listened. And then she did something new. She gathered up the feelings from the riverbank. She gathered the sound of the children's laughter, the gentle music from the guitar, the warmth of Alina's stories, the feeling of shared purpose from the people working together. She took all of this new, beautiful energy, this human song of remembrance and care, and she gently offered it to the river. She held it out like a gift. She did not force it. She just let the river feel it through her. She was no longer a lone whisperer trying to heal a wound. She was a bridge. She was connecting the song of the people with the song of the water, and the river responded. The deep hum grew into a clear, resonant note. It was a sound of immense gratitude, of a deep and profound relief. The river's song, silent for so long, was returning. It was not the strong, joyful song of the headwaters. It was a quiet song, a little weak, a little sad, tinged with the memory of its long loneliness. But it was there. It was alive. The silent heart was beginning to beat again. The change was visible. The murky water seemed to swirl with a new energy. The slow, sluggish current began to move with a little more purpose. A small flock of birds, a kind Kaia had not seen since leaving her home, suddenly swooped down and landed on the bank, their cheerful chirping adding a new layer to the growing symphony of life. The people on the bank stopped what they were doing and stared. They did not know what was happening, but they knew it was something special. A sense of wonder and awe fell over the crowd. In that one perfect moment, the gray world was filled with a vibrant, living music. It was the music of a river remembering its own name. It was the music of a community remembering its own heart. The hush was in retreat, pushed back by the simple, powerful magic of people who had decided to care. Kaia kept her hands in the water, her eyes closed, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. The song was back. It was a fragile new song, but it was real, and it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Chapter 8. A New Kind of Whisperer. The River Remembrance Day was not an end. It was a beginning. The single beautiful note of the river's returning song did not fix everything in an instant, but it changed the foundation of the world. It was a promise. It was proof that healing was possible. In the days and weeks that followed, the energy from that afternoon did not fade. It settled into the community and began to grow in quiet, steady ways. The cleanup work on the riverbank did not stop. It became a regular weekend activity, a new tradition for the neighborhood. More people came to help, not out of a sense of duty, but out of a newfound sense of connection and pride. They were not just cleaning up a dirty river, they were tending to their place. The physical changes to the river became more noticeable. The water, which for so long had been a murky, lifeless brown, slowly began to clear. You could start to see the stones and pebbles on the bottom near the shore. The constant, foul smell that had hung over the water for generations began to dissipate, replaced by a cleaner, more earthy scent, the true smell of a living river. Small, hardy green plants began to grow along the water's edge, their roots taking hold in the newly cleaned soil, creating a soft, green border between the land and the water. More birds came, their songs adding to the growing life of the area. One day, Leo, his eyes wide with excitement, pointed out a small, silvery fish darting in the shallows. It was the first fish he had ever seen in this river. It felt like a miracle. The river's song grew stronger with each passing day. Kaia could feel it as a constant, gentle presence in the back of her mind. The deep, sorrowful moan was gone, replaced by a soft, humming melody. It was the sound of a patient, slow healing. The river was not yet the vibrant, joyful being she knew from her home in the headwaters, but it was no longer a victim. It had agency again. It was actively participating in its own recovery, using the small kindnesses of the community as fuel to cleanse its own waters. The hush, the great oppressive silence that had consumed her father, was in a full retreat. It had no power here anymore. It could not feed on a heart that was no longer forgotten. Kaia knew, deep in her bones, that the greatest danger had passed. The river would continue to heal as long as the people did not turn their backs on it again. And she had a feeling they would not. The connection that had been reforged was real. It had become a part of their community's identity. They were the people who had brought their river back to life. One morning, as she was sitting on the clean riverbank, watching the sun rise, she felt a new sensation. It was a faint, familiar feeling from far, far away. It was a vibration that traveled up the entire length of the river, a message carried on the current. It was a clear, strong note of a life song that she knew as well as her own. It was the song of her father. It was not the full, powerful song she remembered from her childhood. It was quieter, softer, and changed by his long ordeal. But it was there. It was unmistakable. He was waking up. The knowledge filled her with a profound sense of peace and joy that was so overwhelming it felt like she was floating. He was safe. Her journey, her impossible, desperate quest, had been a success. She had done what she had set out to do. She had not just found the river's heart, she had helped to mend it. And in doing so, she had saved him. The time had come for her to go home. The thought was bittersweet. A part of her longed for the green quiet of her valley, for the familiar faces of her people, for the deep, pure song of the headwaters. But another part of her felt a deep sadness at the thought of leaving this place. She had found a new kind of family here, a new kind of purpose. She had watched a small piece of a broken world begin to heal, and she had been a part of it. This gray, loud city was no longer just a place of pain and fear. It was a place of hope, of resilience, of community. It had become a part of her story. Her goodbyes were quiet. She found Leo by their spot on the riverbank. He seemed to know what she had come to say before she even spoke. There was a sadness in his eyes, but also a deep understanding. He had grown so much in the past few months. He was no longer just a lonely little boy. He was a guardian of the river, a young leader in his community. "You're leaving, aren't you?" he asked, his voice soft. Kaia nodded. "My father is awake," she said simply. "I have to go home." Leo did not try to convince her to stay. He knew her home was somewhere else, somewhere far away. He just looked at the river, which was sparkling in the morning light. "Will you come back?" he asked. "One day," Kaia promised. "But you don't need me anymore. You are the whisperer for this river now, Leo." The boy looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise. "But I can't hear it sing," he said. "You don't have to hear it with your ears," Kaia said, placing her hand gently on his chest. "You hear it with your heart. You listen by caring for it. You listen by bringing people here to remember it. You have been listening all along. Just promise me you'll keep listening." Leo nodded, his face serious. "I promise," he said. And she knew he would keep that promise. The river was safe in his care. She also said goodbye to Elena. The old woman hugged her tightly, her embrace warm and fragrant with the smell of lavender. She did not ask Kaia where she was going. She just looked at her with her kind, knowing eyes. "Thank you, child," she whispered. "Thank you for reminding us of who we are." Kaia's journey home was the reverse of her journey out, but the world looked completely different to her now. The city did not seem as loud or as gray. She no longer saw it as a single monstrous thing. She saw it as a collection of stories, of individual lives. She saw the small acts of connection everywhere. She saw the man tending to his window box of flowers, not as a strange, isolated act, but as a small whisper of love for the living world. She saw the woman feeding the pigeons not as a nuisance, but as a caretaker, The harsh noises of the city were still there, but she could also hear the quieter sounds underneath, the human song of life that she had been deaf to before. The further she got from the city, the stronger the river's song became. It was a joyful, welcoming sound, pulling her forward, guiding her home. When she finally crossed the border back into her own valley, the familiar scent of damp earth and river flowers was the sweetest thing she had ever smelled. The deep, powerful song of the great river washed over her, cleansing the last of the city's weariness from her spirit. She arrived at her village in the soft light of the evening. The whisperers came out of their homes to greet her. Their faces were not filled with pity or shame for her anymore. They were filled with awe. They had felt the change in the river. They had felt the silence recede. They had felt their master whisperer's song return. They did not understand how she had done it, but they knew that she had succeeded where all their power and wisdom had failed. She found her father, Leon, sitting on the smooth gray rock by the river's edge, the place where the elders had first named the Hush. He was thinner, and there were new lines on his face. His song was quieter than it had been, humbled by its long battle with the silence. He looked up as she approached, and his eyes, the same color as the deep river pools, were filled with a profound and endless love. He did not need to ask her what had happened. He had felt it. He had experienced her entire journey through his connection to the river. He had felt her despair, her anger, her small acts of courage, and the final glorious return of the people's song. He had seen the world through her eyes. He stood up and held out his arms, and she went into his embrace. They did not speak for a long time. They just stood together, father and daughter, two whisperers reunited by the song of the water. "You have changed, Kaia," he said finally, his voice full of a deep, quiet pride. "You left here a child who could feel the river's shout. You have returned a woman who has taught a forgotten world how to listen to its quietest breath." Kaia looked at her home, at the green valley and the clear singing water. It was more beautiful than she had ever realized, but her world was bigger now. It was not just this valley, it was also the gray, noisy city downriver. It was the faces of Leo and Alina. It was the memory of people working together to heal a wound. Her life was no longer just about protecting the song that was already strong. It was about carrying that song into the places where it had been forgotten. She was no longer just a whisperer who listened. She had become something new. She was a bridge, a weaver of connections, a teacher of forgotten languages. Her purpose was not just to live in harmony with the natural world, but to help the human world rediscover its own place within that harmony. Her journey was over, but her real work was just beginning.